Good evening. It's good to be back, appropriately on the eve of Bloomsday as I'm focusing in on James Joyce this evening. And I'll start with the opening part of a chapter from my autobiography, There Is a Time, final chapter, Joyful Mystery, as it's kind of related to James Joyce. A sharp pain in my stomach woke me just before dawn. My mouth filled up with bile. I hopped out of bed and rushed to the fireplace and spat into the grate. Again my mouth filled up with the sour liquid, and again I spewed it out. I reached for a bottle of Maalox on the mantelpiece and took a swig. Then I went back and got under the covers. Within seconds I was free of the pain. I tried to go back to sleep, but a calf lowing in one of the barns at the back of the cottage kept me awake. I switched on my bedside lamp and took up a paperback copy of James Joyce's Dubliners and started reading. An hour flew by. I start there because James too had an ulcer and must have suffered greatly before he died from it. But the main reason I start there is because later that same day, a fairly turbulent day, I wrote my first real song after struggling to write songs for more than 10 years. I got the idea of writing all the songs for Just Another Town. So I'll start with that song, as it's my hymn to the city I grew up in, as Dubliners was to Joyce. The old spinster is going insane. Her next door neighbor is in church again. Two drunks are fighting down in the lane, and little children are playing a game. Dogs are barking and little girls sing, and the chapel bell begins to ring. Someone deals Bobby a king. On the pavement money starts to ring. Oh, and the street is drifting into evening while the sun is going down. I'm just back there capturing the feeling, though it's just another town. Just another town. The cripple crawls up the avenue. Oh, and someone else says, how do you do? Someone kicks a ball over to you while the sky begins to lose its hue. And a group of old stevedores from the ships come up the street bent from the hips. One takes a cigarette from his lips. Someone else drops the coin he flips. Oh, and the street is drifting into evening while the sun is going down. I'm just back there capturing the feeling, though it's just another town. Just another town. And in the band room up on the hill, a brass band's playing, I can hear it still. The slide trombone is softly blown. The old nurse is on her way to the shops. The epileptic suddenly drops. Down the hill my father's in the docks, and in the bar the drinking never stops. Bobby throws down a pair of queens, The church bell interrupts someone's dreams. Someone's talking of football teams. Some girl is straightening her nylon seams. Oh, and the street is drifting into evening while the sun is going down. I'm just back there capturing the feeling, though it's just another town, just another town. So we'll move into the essay. Of course, Joyce was a singer himself and a guitar player, I've read all his books, or tried to write all of them. Didn't manage to get past the last one, but not too many have done that. A brother of mine did. Portrait of a Wayward Artist. And there's two quotations before I get into this. One, actually, I spotted this morning, and I'll have to add it to it. A book has but a single voice, but is not equally profitable to all who read it. And I guess I'll put that in is because my slant on Joyce will be totally different than most of the essays that I've read on the man. And the second one, heresy can be an enlargement of the mind. Cardinal Newman wrote that, and it's a key one because it informs the whole work, Modern Heresies. Heresy can be an enlargement of the mind. My interest in John Henry Newman was first awakened by James Joyce, an avid admirer of the Cardinal, even while Joyce was writing about his rejection of the Catholic faith that he was raised in. In a literary debate in chapter 2 of the Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, page 80 of the Penguin edition, when Stephen Dedalus is asked by one of his college chums who he believes who is the greatest writer, Stephen proclaims polemically Cardinal Newman and Lord Byron. When one of his friends points out the dichotomy of choosing a bad man like Byron for such an accolade, another student casts this slur at Dedalus: "Catch hold of the heretic," which is followed by the standalone narrative line, "In a moment, Stephen was a prisoner." A question I asked myself after first reading this was, why was this polarized literary choice highlighted by James Joyce, the writer, in relation to his fictional alter ego, Stephen Dedalus? The answer, of course, is that he was fully aware of the danger he was flirting with by attempting to wing it with angels and devils at the same time, which is illustrated later in the book when Stephen defiantly proclaims, "I am not afraid to make a mistake, even a great mistake, a lifelong mistake, and perhaps as long as eternity too." Though he offers the famous hell sermon as an example of the absurdity of the faith he was abandoning, an ingenious passage that so many writers and readers who follow him out of the church harp on, Joyce himself was fully aware that the scene of torment he described so brilliantly was merely a comical display of Dante-esque allegory, which becomes evident on page 128 of the portrait in a much more sober, though no less disturbing description of hell by a man Stephen lauds as the greatest doctor of the church, the angelic doctor, Thomas Aquinas. The worst damnation consists in this, that the understanding of man is totally deprived of divine light, and his affection obstinately turned away from the goodness of God. Joyce's confusion regarding his faith is amplified in later passages on the question of the Eucharist, when Stephen states that he neither believes nor disbelieves in it. And again, when he answers an accusation that he doesn't believe that Jesus is the Son of God with this prevarication, I am not at all sure. He is more like the Son of God than the Son of Mary. Because I was so baffled by these and other ambiguous passages in my reading of the portrait of the artist as a young man in relation to Joyce's apostasy when I revisited the novel, I read it a second time and underlined so many areas that told of Joyce's doubt and confusion in relation to his jettisoning his faith. I ended up writing this summation of my thoughts on the book in the back flyleaf of the novel. The thing that strikes me most is the doubt and uncertainty of Joyce's break from the church and his faith. The lusts of the body appear to be the main motivating force that started him on the road to what he considered freedom. Byron and Shelley, both atheists, were the poets influencing him at the time, but at the back of his doubting mind, Cardinal Newman, the greatest prose writer of his age, according to Joyce, stands in opposition to his waywardness. Cardinal Newman, who said wisely somewhere, "Heresy can itself be an enlargement of the mind." In Joyce's case, how true this proved to be. But in the end, the scope of his mental shenanigans in Finnegan's Wake is so broad and dense, it's impenetrable for most readers. A kind of Tower of Babel constructed of words rather than bricks. In Newman's autobiography, The Apologia, the Cardinal is highly critical of Byron for leading a generation astray and for distorting the meaning of the word liberal, when he and Shelley applied it to their design of excluding God and all things religious from their manifesto. Though both poets had developed their poetic skill with the help of the influence of the revolutionary poetry of William Wordsworth, who returned to the Christian faith after his fling in France during the French Revolution, Wordsworth, whom Newman admired for the spiritual awareness he brought back to English literature at a time when all things spiritual and religious were in sharp decline. There was certainly an expansion of mind in the poetic terrain that Byron and Shelley mined during those times, fueled by the evolutionary discoveries of Darwin and the convolutions they unleashed all over Europe and the rest of the world. But how lucky we are that someone as bright and spiritually perceptive as Newman, who was around during the same turbulent period, held a steady hand on the tiller of Christ's battered craft while the world around him was falling away from the source of power and reason that had given Europe its towering cultural achievements in the arts and sciences down the centuries, to say nothing of the peace of mind that faith has given ordinary men and women down the ages. Regarding Joyce's shaky rejection of Christianity, one of the great literary finds I happened upon in the Faber edition of his letters was a note he wrote towards the end of his life in which he states that his bedside reading was one of Cardinal Newman's works. By that stage in Joyce's life, there is no mention of Byron in his final correspondence, so I like to think that it's quite conceivable that Ireland's finest writer of modern times had a change of heart regarding his apostasy and issued a mea culpa in his sickbed in Switzerland before he departed our world. I'll read another few short pieces that relate to that, because Joyce had such an enormous influence on literature during our time, really, that I think it's appropriate. The first one is on Beckett. Not just waiting, but searching. One of the last books that Samuel Beckett is said to have read in the run-up to his death was The Divine Comedy by Dante, a book that takes us to the depths of the natural world to show us a supernatural way out of it, through faith and through the heart. This one on Paddy Kavanagh. reading between the lines of Antoinette Quinn's biography of Patrick Kavanagh. I often suspected, but now I know what enlivened and enriched and set Patrick Kavanagh's poetry at its best for me above the heights W.B. Yeats attained when he rubbed the twilight from his misty eyes, dismounted from his lofty stilts, got down to earth, Antaeus-like, and gained power on his way to the rag and bone shop of the heart, though not with the same level of gravitas Paddy attained from his more earthy gropings for the eternal in the clay. It's all there in Antoinette's book, though she seems unaware of it herself. The Christian God he clung to while the giants of Irish literature all around him were jumping ship from a storm-tossed craft because the captain seemed more in a coma than asleep. At his most doubtful, probably tipsy moment, Paddy too apostatized, when Ben Kiley informed him of the death of an eminent clergyman, and Kavanagh glibly responded, "Now he knows what I always knew. There is no God." After learning of this hypocritical denial, I inclined to lose my faith in the man from near Ballyrush in Gorton, till after reading of his long, chaotic and lonely descent into alcoholism due to critical neglect and poverty, I was relieved to learn of his atonement from his Peter moment, when, inflamed on his deathbed, in his last gasp, he exclaimed what his poetry had always proclaimed enchantedly to me, "My God, I believe." And I'll finish up before singing a song with this wee one. The Word. As a flame emits light to illuminate, the Word gives meaning to communicate. Now that may seem very obvious, but this little snippet is leading up to one of the most important essays actually in the collection on T.S. Eliot, one of the greatest poets of not only the last century but of all centuries, I think. So I go out on a song that I think Eliot would have liked in his later years. And James too, actually, because he was, I believe, he used to drop into chapels all his life. Bells were ringing out in the town in the evening when the light died down, and I remember going along when the congregation was strong for benediction, the rising of the sun. Benediction, the rising of the sun. A choir was singing clear and soft, voices weaving hymns in the organ loft. And I remember people kneeling down, humble people of the town, for benediction, the rising of the sun. Benediction, the rising of the sun. Through clouds clouds of incense, the golden monstrance shining so bright in candlelight, showing God's might in benediction, the rising of the sun. Benediction. Yeah, I was going to do one on Dylan next week, but I think I better do T.S. first. He being the greatest writer of the last century, I believe. Tune in then, please. All the best.